So quite recently I did a video on my top 10 favourite classic Doctor Who stories, with these two being my favourite pieces of television of all time. However, for this video we're going into a more negative, upsetting direction, because this is the top 10 disappointing Doctor Who stories. Now this isn't just restricted to classic Doctor Who, this is everything, the whole shebang. This is TV stories, Big Finish audios, and the books, all of them. Now what's quite funny, half of this list, 50% of it, is actually Big Finish audios. Probably because I've listened to a lot of Big Finish audios. Now I don't really hate any of these stories besides one of them, and I think it's pretty obvious what that story is. The other ones, really, besides that one, I just was really disappointed with them. That they just did not deliver to the expectation that it should have been. It just failed to deliver. So without no further ado, let's showcase my top 10 most disappointing Doctor Who stories. Yeah, we're starting off with a classic Doctor Who TV story, The Hand of Fear by Bob Baker and Dave Martin. Now these two writers, I don't think they haven't shined at all, really. Three Doctors, I would say that's probably their most famous work, even though that splits the crowd sometimes. I think the problem is, sometimes, it doesn't really go for this. Actually, it does, actually. Sometimes I think their stories are a little bit too ambitious to pull off, and the effects, it just doesn't work. It doesn't look right. It just looks really cheap. The Mutants, for example, by Bob Baker and Dave Martin, that definitely shows that the story is a little bit too ambitious. I like the story and how it was written, but its effects and how it looked like and its execution really pulled it down. But the problem I have with The Hand of Fear is just really unremarkable. It's very forgettable. It's an Earthbound story, but I just does not compare with the other Doctor Who Earthbound stories, even from the fourth Doctor Who, like Robot, or Terror of the Zygons, Android Invasion, The Seeds of Doom. It just has nothing on those stories. As you can tell, it's a very Sarah-focused story, as the Doctor's really just in the background of the cover to like symbolise that this is going to be a Sarah Jane story, and it is because it's a departure story. I've watched it twice and I don't like it really. I'm not a fan of it. Some people say it's underrated, which is completely fine, but yeah, overall this is not very of a well appreciated Doctor Who story. Just a lot of people just forget it, and I can definitely tell why. It's because other stories completely overshadow it, because they're better than this story. I quite like Aldred, but it really does fall apart near part 4. That's when, you know, Bob Baker and Dave Martin being a little bit too ambitious. Aldred's an okay villain. Maybe the Big Finish audio and the sequel, which is Aldred Must Die, does this story and this villain with a bit more justice. Doom Coalition 2. Yeah, reviewed this back in the day. I was not very impressed with it. Because, well, Doom Coalition 1, I would say it started out perfectly. It did. Like 10 out of 10 quality of stories. The 11 was a perfect way to introduce this series, and with the main villain being the 11, that's probably the best story and the best way he's been portrayed. That story being the first of the series. And the second one being quite standalone, being the Red Lady. Again, that was absolutely perfect. Then when it went to the second half, the Galileo Trap and the Satanic Mill, I forgot the name of it there. It lost what the first half had. It completely went downhill. It felt like a completely different box set. And that's where we come into Doom Coalition 2. A very disappointing release from this series. And I did not get the 9 out of 10 and 10 out of 10 ratings because there's so much problems with it. I do not agree with those ratings. I know people are entitled to their own opinions, but I find that absolute bullshit. First story, Beachhead, it featured the Vord. To be honest, they weren't very well portrayed in this at all. They were much better portrayed in Domain of the Void because they actually felt threatening, and a massive improvement from the Keys of Marinus because they weren't really well utilised in the Keys of Marinus because it basically in part 1 and part 6 and only mentioned once in part 3. They weren't in part 2, 3, 4 or 5. If they were pursuing and following the main characters, the Doctor, Ian, Barbara and Susan, then that would have been fantastic, but they didn't do that. That was one of Terry Nation's plans to make a new villain up with the Daleks. It didn't work, it failed. And Domain of the Void is definitely where the Void have been portrayed the best. Beachhead, no. Scenes from Her Life, this was by John Dorney, who's a writer which I definitely respect. Not one of his best stories compared to all his other work, but it was good. It was good. But when we come to The Gift and the Solomancer, it's filler. Well, especially The Gift, that is definitely filler by Mark Platt. It was enjoyable, but it was filler. The Solomancer is where it just completely crumbles. I absolutely hate the Solomancer. It was terrible. How it betrayed the 11, that was not done correctly at all. It's by Matt Fitton as well. He set up the villain perfectly in the 11, but yet he ruins the villain in the last story of Doom Coalition 2. What Matt Fitton did in the Solomancer, it was done way too early. You should have done that near the end or something, because you're making the villain out to be a joke very early on, and that's not good. Because it doesn't feel like that long when the villain was previously first established. But yeah, whatever. Yeah, River Song's in this one as well. The last story. Was she needed? No, I personally don't think she was needed in the series. It was, to me, basically a marketing strategy for the River Song series. Because when looking at that series, I don't think Big Finish had much faith that it would actually sell well. That's why they put the Doctor in these box sets, because if they don't do that, they wouldn't sell very well. So the 8th Doctor is in Series 1, the 6th and the 7th Doctor is in Series 2, and I can't remember who's in the 3rd series, because that is not out yet. I think it's the 5th Doctor, but I might be wrong there, because I can't remember, because I'm not interested in the series at all. Basically, that insinuates to me that they have no faith in the series that it would sell very well if the Doctor's not in it. Because with Benny Summerfield, she is a beloved character. If you follow the Virgin New Adventures and whatnot, the Doctor doesn't have to really need to be in that box set for her to sell well, really. And the series is doing brilliant with the Unbound stuff. But yeah, enough ranting about that. It's a very underwhelming release, really average, 5 out of 10, not 8th Doctor quality, I don't think. Like Dark Eyes 1, or even Dark Eyes 4 for that matter. Nah. Last of the Cybermen. Now, come to think of it, I could put the entire Locum Doctors trilogy on this list, because the whole thing was a massive letdown. It was the build-up to the 200th release of the Doctor Who Big Finish monthly range. It was the Defectors, Last of the Cybermen, and the Secret History being the 200th monthly range release. The idea of the series was to put an incarnation of the Doctor, but in a different era of the show. So the 5th Doctor was in the 1st Doctor era, the 6th Doctor was in the 2nd Doctor era, and the 7th Doctor was in the 3rd Doctor era. So basically, the 5th Doctor will have a pure historical story, because that is the definition of what a 1st Doctor story is to many people. The 6th Doctor will be up against the Cybermen, because the Cybermen were the biggest foe for the 2nd Doctor, and he gets some based on the siege elements in that story, because that definitely defines the 2nd Doctor story. And the 7th Doctor would get a 3rd Doctor Earthbound story. It was a fantastic idea, but the execution, it wasn't there. It was such a fantastic idea, but it didn't work. It came down to the stories themselves. They had problems with them. I hate it where an idea so good just doesn't get delivered. It's terrible. That's why the Locum Doctors trilogy to many people was such an underwhelming trilogy. Honestly, I don't think I should just put Last of the Cybermen on it. I feel like putting all 3 on them, so I'm going to get the other 2. Yeah, I changed my mind. It's not going to be Last of the Cybermen. I'm going to put all 3 on them. Because originally, when I put Last of the Cybermen, to me, that's the most underwhelming one out of the 3. But I've changed my mind. I'm putting all 3 on them. But it counts as, but they all count as number 8 on the list. The Defectors. This is by, oh yeah, Nicholas Briggs. I forgot who it was by. It starts out great. It does. I was very happy with it. It felt like a third Doctor story. It got mystery. Earthbound elements were great. You know, Captain Yates is in this one, so it was going great for the first half. Then we come to the second half and it completely crumbled. It just crumbled and fell right on its face. It's a good story, but didn't meet my expectations. I think I gave this a 7 out of 10. I've only listened to it twice and it's been about 2 years when I've listened to this one. I don't think I'll return to this trilogy because this is so underwhelming. Last of the Cybermen, personally my least favourite and the most disappointing out of the trilogy. I think I gave this a 5 from memory in my review. And yeah, I'll still stand by that even though it's been 2 years since I've listened to it. Didn't deliver. Didn't feel like a second Doctor story to me. And it's basically a rehash of Evil the Daleks, just giving the Cyberman an Evil the Dalek story. And The Secret History, the 200th Big Finish monthly range release. The first half is brilliant. It is. But it takes this direction where it goes all over the place. I like the choice of villain. That definitely fits this trilogy and the whole idea of it. I won't say what villain it is because that'd be a spoiler. But no, there's a lot of loose ends I found in this story and things just swept under the rug, and I didn't much care for it. Again, good, but not fantastic. I think I gave this a 6. I can't remember because it's been ages when I reviewed these. But Last of the Cybermen was definitely the most disappointing one because it featured my favourite villains of all time, the Cybermen, and they just weren't done correctly. They just weren't done with justice. Again, great performances and all that. You can never deny that performances are bad. Well, Necromantia, I can definitely say. The performances were great. It's just the stories. It's just the stories. A massive disappointment for the Locum Doctors trilogy. Dust Breeding by Mike Tucker. This follows The Defectors. It has the same problems, it does. Basically the same problem, the big problem. It starts out fantastic. By looking at the cover, it looks really creepy. It's really eerie. It feels like a true 7th Doctor story, and especially with the 7th Doctor hidden, like portrayed like behind the shadows. That really defines who the 7th Doctor is. And yeah, as I said, first half, I love it. It was absolutely brilliant. Really creepy. I love the sound design as well. This is from 2001 and the sound design is really creepy. Really good. But the second half, the story goes over the top. It does. It goes really bizarre. And I can't remember too much about this audio because it's been a while since I listened to it. It didn't really stick in my head, this story. But it does feature the Krill, who are very good monsters. They are. I do like them. Like basically a super weapon created. I won't go too much in their history and whatnot because that's not really this is not really the video to do that really. But they are very fascinating monsters. If you want to have the best experience of these monsters, even though I haven't read the book, read Storm Harvest because this is the sequel to Storm Harvest. But yeah, the sequel isn't as good. First half is brilliant. Second half, it goes over the top. And if you listen to the story, you would definitely know what I mean by over the top. Winter for the Adept. This is by Andrew Cartmel, one of the earliest Big Finish monthly range releases. This is number 10. And this one seriously disappointed me. I wasn't going to this one expecting too much. I was thinking it'd be quite like Land of the Dead, which is an awful Big Finish story, mind you. But this one, the first half, I could see it going somewhere. I wasn't blown away by it, but I was like, yeah, it's going somewhere. The Doctor isn't in part 1, so it gives you this mystery of where the hell the 5th Doctor is. But the way the Fifth Doctor, this is just from memory, mind you, but the way the Doctor was introduced in Part 2 is just so jarring. It just appears. It's like, oh, well, that mystery is just cut to a halt right there. So, that definitely wasn't delivered very well. But Part 2, but besides that, Part 2 was fantastic. Really good ghost story. And I was saying, oh, is this going to be a really creepy ghost story set in the Alps? That's really good. Something like Drift, maybe, from the BBC PDA range. But no, it completely crumbles. Part 2, it really showcases that this would be a really good Base Under Siege contained, isolated ghost story. In Part 3 and Part 4, the story goes really silly. Really silly. I hated the second part. I did. Again, overall, I would probably give it a 4. Again, I don't hate it like Time Room Genesis level or Invasion of the Cat. Actually, I don't really hate Invasion of the Cat because it's just really bad. Or Synthespians, nothing like that. But awful compared to Part 2. Part 2 is the only thing good about this. Just listen to Part 2. Part 1's okay. Then it has that really weird, jarring... It's just very jarring how the Fifth Doctor just pops up. He does. It's not really explained. It would have been such a good poltergeist story. Because objects are moving around, chairs, knives. It would have been so fantastic, but it didn't deliver. Stones of Blood. Finally getting off the Big Finish stuff for a bit. This is one of my least favourite classic stories of all time. Now comes as a big surprise because a lot of people love this story. It's a popular Fourth Doctor story, but I don't like it. One of my least favourites from the Tom Baker era. It's my least favourite from the Key to Time era, or series, whatever you want to call it. It's by David Fisher. It's got a very formulaic approach to it, and I don't like it. It really doesn't suit this horror aspect it's going for the first half. Again, a lot of stories follow this direction. They do. The first half, it's Hammer horror. It reminds me of Hammer House of Horror, or just really classic nailed horror. Good old classic horror. But then it takes this science fiction direction, which it really doesn't suit it. It just doesn't work. The second half, it completely changes. The whole story just shifts into this other type of story. First half, classic horror. Second half, completely science fiction. And all the classic horror, which was established, is faded away. It's gone. Disappeared into the void. I hate it when stories do this, especially for horror. Cloisters of Terror did it, and I didn't much appreciate it. It's a very formulaic direction, and I don't think it's a good formula, especially for horror. I hate it when they do it with horror. I do like a little bit of science fiction elements in there, but nothing as heavy as this. Performances were good. The story, again, it showcases itself to be something very good in the first half, but it's definitely my least favourite. I've only watched it once. And when twice. I've watched it twice. Because I've gone through the Key to Time twice. And I still stand for this is my least favourite. I know that's very shocking to some people. I prefer the bloody Pirate Planet to this. And that's saying something, that is. I find the Pirate Planet fun. I do. It's a lot of fun. Ribos Operation. The Androids of Tara. The Power of Kroll. I quite like the Power of Kroll, actually. It's better than this. And the Armageddon Factor, very convoluted story. It's very onerous. If I was to do a top 10 worst classic stories, it wouldn't be at the bottom, but it'd be something like 9 or 10, this one. I don't like it. Yeah, this one's gonna confuse a lot of people. Some people might be a little annoyed. That's completely fine. Up to you, because I'm fine with all opinions if you agree or disagree with me. But Vampire Science. Vampire Science. This is a loved 8th Doctor story. It's a very popular one as well. And some people say, actually most people say, let's be honest here, but this is the true start of the 8th Doctor adventures. Or the EDAs. And the 8 Doctors was just a load of trash. I really do feel sorry for the 8 Doctors, because I really enjoy the book. I think the 8 Doctors is a lot of fun, and people just don't really go into it correctly. It's just a tribute to classic Doctor Who. You don't have to, people just don't go into it right, I don't think. That's why a lot of people... I actually don't know why a lot of people hate it. I don't really see it, personally. And I give the 8 Doctors an 8 out of 10. I just enjoy it for what it is. I wasn't expecting too much from it, and I was happy with what I got. Problems is a very flawed book by Terrance Dicks, but it's an enjoyable one. And I may get ragey comments for this, but I prefer the 8 Doctors to Vampire Science if you watch both of my reviews. The 8 Doctors gets a higher mark than this. Alright, we'll first go into the stuff which it absolutely nails. The characterization and development is beyond perfect. It's so good. It's probably the strongest thing about the book. Supporting characters, love them. What they go through, brilliant. The Doctor himself, how he's characterized, is brilliant. Again, flawless, in my opinion. And this is only the second of the EDAs as well. I can't remember her name, but the unit character discusses the sad that the Doctor was not a good person in his previous incarnation, the 7th Doctor. We know the 7th Doctor and his Virgin New Adventure stuff. You know, the Master Manipulator and all that. I really love that stuff when it comes up in this book. It's a nice nod to the Virgin New Adventures, and I really like that aspect of the book, where they think that the Doctor isn't a very good character, a very good person, especially in his previous incarnation. But yeah, it's got pretty nice pacing. Drive's pretty good. It's got some nice unpredictability to it and some twists. But the main problem is the story itself. The execution of its premise. It could have been a lot better, and I was underwhelmed. Yeah, two main areas of how Vampire Science falls for me. The villains and the actual story itself is where is his biggest letdowns rather. The story, it's just too contained for me. Because if they want to establish that these vampires are a massive threat, you've got to make it a little bit more wider. The scope has to be wider. Let's see the point of view of the government and CIA and whatnot, because I wanted to see more of a political aspect of this book. I know a lot of people don't like a political storytelling, but I quite like that stuff. I do, and I wanted to see the government freak out about this rising threat of the vampires, and you know that they can't coexist with humanity due to xenophobia and all that sort of stuff because they're different from humanity. That could have been a really good aspect of the book, but it wasn't delivered, and it needed to, because that would have been such a good part of this, just to see more the political parts. And I think that's something that the book needed, in my opinion at least. But it wasn't. It was too contained for me. Because I think this should have been more of a bigger threat. Because the threat felt too small, in my opinion. Because it just felt like a group of vampires just hiding underneath a theatre. Something like a Jago and Lightfoot story, and not a true a true Doctor Who story, in my opinion. And the villains. Vampires. This takes homage to Buffy and the Vampire Slayer. There's much better vampire books out there. Salem's Lot right above me. It's not the worst. Yeah, you know, we can all agree to that. It's not the worst. You obviously know what I'm referencing. But they definitely had a threatening side, especially to Sam. They definitely had threats, but the main bad guy, the main villain, I found him so cringy. He just didn't feel like a true vampire. Not how I would like vampires to be delivered. Just, I hated him, really. he was very narcissistic. He was, even to other vampires. He's very egotistical and cared for himself. Its main drive, I would say, it's on the characters. That's like its main drive. So it's not, drive isn't. There's better books that have better pacing in this book, because it's mainly on the characters, and I think that's probably one of the weakest forms of pacing, in my opinion. When you just focus it on the characters, I think the story itself should have had better pacing and not just focusing on the characters all the time. There's too much focusing on the characters. Very good, flawless, but you should have shifted. Jonathan Blum and Kate Allman needed to shift it to the story itself. I give it a 6 out of 10. It's not a bad book. It's definitely not a bad book, but it's a very disappointing book. This is the most disappointing Big Finish story I've ever listened to. It's actually a companion chronicle, Upstairs, by Matt Coward. Oh, this one hurts me. This one really hurts me. Part 1, I was thinking a 10 out of 10 with this story. I freaking love Part 1. What it set up was astonishing. It was the story felt so original, so creative. And I really don't want to spoil it, even though it goes to this area which is just so underwhelming. It's a very, I'm trying to explain it without spoiling it here. It's a very paradoxical story, this one. Very paradoxical in the setup of Part 1, with these rooms in the attic. Again, I don't feel like I should say it. Just listen to it for Part 1, and that's it, really. It would have been a great short story. Like one of those Big Finish short stories, for example. But, again, Big Finish Companion Chronicles aren't long. They're just an hour long. I freaking love Part 1, as I said. Part 2, what it sets up, the mystery, the paradoxical elements, the horror factor, or suspense. I wouldn't say horror, but more suspense. Gone. It's gone. How Part 2 goes, it completely crushes what Part 1 set up. All its elements crushed, just destroyed in a million pieces. I could not believe what was going on in Part 2. I was so disappointed. I've never been so disappointed before. But yeah, there's 2 other things which is disappointing me more than this, but this is the most disappointing Big Finish release of all time. Just listen to it for Part 1, and that's it, really. A good 25 minutes. Just don't listen to Part 2. It goes into this whole alien thing, and it doesn't work. I don't think Matt Coward hasn't done anything else for Big Finish. I've never heard of the author before. Well, I never heard of this person before. Such a good idea, but the outcome to it all fails. Yeah, number 2. There's something which I find more disappointing than Synthespians, but this is the book which has pissed me off the most. This more goes to the factor of worst stories of all time, but yet it still highly disappointed me as well. Not only did it extremely disappoint me, but I also hate it. This is the only one on this list which I absolutely hate. I despise it. I can't describe how much I hate this piece of garbage. Right. I reviewed this in October 2016. I did a massive review on it. It's about an hour and 22 minutes. I had to cut it down because the review was, the length was just asinine. Unedited, it was like 2 hours and 50 minutes, and I said, what am I going to do with this? I've never just scripted a review and ranted about something for so long in all my life, because when I was reading it, I was just putting down so many things which this book was getting wrong. It has a lot going for it. It does a lot of things right, but it does a lot more wrong than right. The script is about 50 pages on Synthespians, and it was ridiculous. It's probably the most ridiculous review I've ever done. So I'm going to try and describe Synthespians without going too much into it, because I've already reviewed this fucking thing. Yeah, I know people who like this book, absolutely fine, but I absolutely hate it. Right, the story, it's got a very nice story. It does. But it's set in Reef Station 1, a new Earth colony who are obsessed and love TV and whatnot. And this company or organisation called the Walter J. Matheson Corporation, they have the technology to bring back lost TV, they did, from Earth's history using technology and whatnot, and recreating new shows with Synthespians. I love the idea to it, I do. But it all comes down to execution. Main characters, Sixth Doctor was okay. Peri, not characterised well. She had this really bitchy side to her, which is not her character. It's not as bad as Warmonger, even though I haven't read Warmonger. It's not good. And she's made out to be such a bloody idiot. Peri has common sense, and she meets this other girl called Cynthia. Yeah, I've just looked for the book. Yeah, Peri meets up with this completely random stranger in a mall where Peri's lost. Meets up with this character called Claudia, and then 10 minutes later, Peri puts all her trust in Claudia and just goes with her in a place, a city where she's never been before, and you just go with this random stranger to a nightclub. It feels so stupid to me, it does. It's not Peri. Just have some common decency. Jeez. The first 100 pages is padding. I have never seen so much padding in a book before. It is beyond, I'm going to say the word again, asinine. This book's got so much padding. And it's only 280 pages, and I've never read something which has more padding. Even the big Stephen King books, which are 1,000 odd pages long, and this has more fucking padding in. It blows my mind. Matheson was delivered to be a fantastic villain, and he's very multi-dimensional, a very complex character. Though the outcome to this character was really, really bad. A very corrupted political character. He obviously was obsessed with power. How he obtained power and took control of companies and organisations in the New Earth Republic was really, really sick. How someone was forced to write a contract to take over his company, and he couldn't take it because he built this company from the ground up, and he shot himself because he couldn't take it. Because if he did not sign the contract, then Matheson would do some really terrible, something terrible, and that person couldn't take it, and he shot himself. So he was a really disgusting, vile character, a lot like Tobias Vaughan. But in the end, it was really bad. His motives were, I can't even process it. His motives were so nonsensical, so silly, that I could not take this character, villain, this brilliant villain, built up so well, seriously anymore. The biggest joke of all time. And it links to the Autons. Yes, the Autons in this story. The book doesn't do the Autons right. It's actually embarrassing. Let me just say a few things about that. Baby Autons, exploding breasts, and one of the Autons saying, "We're the Autons, darling!" An Auton actually says that in the book. I'm not sure if I would say what the outcome to Matheson is, which is linked to an Auton. It goes into this love story sort of thing. Should I say it? I'm not sure if I should. You should find out for yourself, because it's that bad. Yeah. I've never hated a Doctor Who story before like this and been so disappointed. It showed so much talent. I love the missing episode references. I love how Matheson was portrayed. Forget all the outcome stuff. I loved how he was portrayed, one of the greatest Doctor Who villains in a book. And then I cannot believe how fast he just what happened to him and the outcome to it all. And the Autons as well. Though, there's something in the review which I cut out because the review was getting too long. It had 2 epilogues in this one, Epilogue 1 and Epilogue 2. Epilogue 2 is alright, it basically just foreshadows Trial of the Time Lord. But I love Epilogue 1. It really teased something just very interesting. So I'll read a part of Epilogue 1. Reef Station 1 survived. The New Earth Republic survived. Eventually, after the Union became the Concordance, the Confederation, and finally the Junta, in relatively brief succession. Mankind, a most unpleasant form of mankind, by now led by a psychopath who claimed lineage from Marvick Chen, decided to seek out all the lost colonies and founded a fiercely independent outpost deep within the Great Barrier. So what the book to me is saying there, that Matheson, one of his ancestors was Marvick Chen, and it seems like he took the inspiration of Marvick Chen, of power and whatnot. He wanted to follow in his footsteps. That yes, Marvick Chen was a big figure. He had a lot of power, a lot of allies within Earth, and then later wanted to have an alliance with the Daleks in the Daleks' master plan. And basically uses them as cannon fodder for his own plans, just like the Daleks were using him as just basically a tool. They were both manipulating each other, both deceiving each other. So that's what Matheson did. And he had his own plans, which are linked to the Autons. So that is a reference to the Daleks' master plan. And yet this features way in the future of the Daleks' master plan, which increases my theory that Matheson was, one of his ancestors was Marvick Chen. Because Daleks' master plan is set when talking about Kemble, like the year 4000. And this is set in the 101st century, which is around about 6,000 years after the events of where the Daleks' master plan set. So that definitely increases my theory on that whole subject. So, I quite like that, I do. This book had so much potential. It showed it in places, but it really didn't know what to be. So many problems, so many flaws. It had this side where it wanted to be a soap. It had this side where it wanted to be really gravitas. It didn't come together. It didn't hit. And I will never read it again. I will never read this book again. And that's number 2 on the list. Yeah, number 1, I'll showcase it like this. This is, in my opinion, the most disappointing Doctor Who story of all time. I hate this one more. This is the only one on the list which I absolutely despise. How the story looked like really grabbed my attention. And from this particular series, this particular range, it was in fact my most anticipated from the entire series. And it fell right on its face. I don't think I'm a fan of this author. I don't really like his style and his execution and how he delivers his stories. I find They're not that gripping. Not that well executed. The story I'm on about is Drift by Simon A. Forward. I really wish I could like this book. I've tried twice. December 2016, I think. Yeah, it was definitely 2016 because I read Synthespians. I wanted to read a good PDA. Just forget about that trash. And the one I went for was Drift, and it didn't work. Yeah, Simon A. Forward. I'm not a fan of this author. Again, he's got some very good ideas. There's when it all comes down to how to execute that idea is where it's the biggest flaw for me, in my opinion. He did Dreamtime. Part 1 was great. The rest of it, execution was his problem. He did an unpublished work which I've read called Equilibrium. It was originally going to be a Virgin Missing adventure. Didn't happen. Then it was going to originally be a PDA. It didn't happen, and it was replaced with Drift. I've read that unpublished novel, and I don't think it was very good at all. And it was actually a prequel to one of his other stories, being Emotional Chemistry. The Sandman is probably his best work. Again, I love the idea to it. 7 out of 10. Again, nothing groundbreaking, but still enjoyable. But Drift. This was a massive disappointment. I do not agree with some of the praise it gets. One thing I definitely look into a book is atmosphere. This book definitely looked like it had the traits to be a very atmospheric story. So I would compare it to something like Nightshade, which is definitely the best Doctor Who story to me when it comes to atmosphere. Intensity by Dean Koontz, that has fantastic atmosphere in this. But this, the atmosphere was not that well. It wasn't very good. I read this during December, the perfect time. When reading it, I didn't find the atmosphere very thick. I don't think he did a very good job. And that is very sad. This is again where it's his biggest fault, and I think some people don't realise that the characterisation of the supporting characters is actually very good. People think, yeah, it's heavily characterisation on the supporting characters. That makes it good characterisation. No, that doesn't necessarily mean it's good characterisation. Heavy characterisation doesn't mean good characterisation. It's not. It's too much focusing on them. And to be honest, this is a very lackadaisical thing I find about Drift. But they don't have... They feel like clones to me. They do. None of them have like sparking identities, and you can't really differentiate them. But the only way that Simon A. Forward puts it, where you can differentiate the characters, is by their rank and what role they have in the White Shadow. I find that quite lackadaisical, I do, of how to... I know it's a very mean word, but I just find it a very lazy way of trying to differentiate the characters to help you identify them. It would have been a lot better if you do it by their personality and not their role, their job role. If it's lazy. So, I absolutely disagree to people say that the characterization is good, because it's not. And the Fourth Doctor and Leela, they're not really a part of the main story. They just feel like they're outside of the story. They're not really getting into the main story. So the main characters, as it says, supporting characters are too much focused on and pushing the main characters away. They're called main characters for a reason, you know. And the story, in parts, it doesn't make sense. There is one part where Leela was on a snowmobile, and it never explained where she was going and why. I was looking back saying, what? Why is she doing this? So I looked back on the book saying, where does it say this? She's going somewhere, but it doesn't give you the context of where she's going and why. I said, I must be missing something, but I looked at the book and I couldn't find anything. So I was really puzzled. I gotta be honest, this book confused me in some places where I didn't think it made sense of a structure of the story. I was getting a little bit confused of saying, why is this happening and where is Leela going? I don't know, I was like that on the second read when I read the entire book. I still didn't get it. So it feels like to me there's parts where there isn't any context of why this is happening. And I like the stuff where White Shadow are not really fond of Unit and whatnot. I find them pretty corrupted. I quite like that part. It's very small, so they don't really trust the Doctor and whatnot. That was good. It doesn't last that long, though. But yeah, the book takes too long to get the wheels rolling. To be honest, I don't think it does get the wheels rolling. The villains, they do feel like they fit in the story and the environment, but again, the environment and the atmosphere wasn't delivered to its full potential. And Nightshade makes this look like a piece of crap when talking about atmosphere. Definitely gets his research right on the military and all that stuff, like the militaristic parts of the story. That's well researched, because I did look it up and say, yeah, this is a real jet which they're talking about, which crash landed in New Hampshire, and that's why the White Shadow are here to investigate this crash landing which happened in New Hampshire. So the research is good. The overall story, it disappointed me. The biggest disappointment for me when it comes to Doctor Who, because it was my most anticipated PDA. I wanted it to get this out of my mind, and it didn't work. And again, I read it for the second time, thinking that maybe Synthespians has sort of affected me too much, where my enjoyment wasn't too much on this. But I read it a second time, December 2017. No. Again, it didn't work. I still had the same problems which were coming up before. So yes, in my opinion, the most disappointing Doctor Who story of all time is Drift by Simon A. Forward. Because it's out of all these stories, it's the one that hurts the most. Yes, that is my list of the top 10 most disappointing stories with Doctor Who. If you have a top 10 most disappointing Doctor Who stories, put it in the comments. I would love to see. Make a video response to it if you want to. See if people agree or disagree of what I put on this list. And I think some people will disagree with me, because Drift is very popular. I just don't see it. Synthespians some people like. I definitely do not see it. So yes, that's the end of the video. If you want to follow any of my social media links, Facebook, Twitter, and Goodreads, where, you know, I won't review every single Doctor Who book or every book on this channel. So that'll mainly just be Goodreads. So all of that snazzy stuff is in the description down below. So thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video, which will probably be my Doctor Who top 5 controversies. I'm changing number 5 because I'm not really happy with it, and maybe my Doctor Who and maybe my Stephen King book review of Misery will be coming out soon. So thanks for watching, and of course, have a good one.